good afternoon, evening, morning, everyone. Lovely to have you all here. Unfortunately, the presentation platform only allows one presenter, but I did want to just take a moment to just acknowledge the very many people who have been part of this project in Katutura, Namibia, that we've been working on for the past 3 years. So it's been quite a journey, but most notably, I just wanted to acknowledge my colleague Sophie Nami, who's the co-author of the report that you got the link to, and she conducted really all of the data analysis, and so I just wanted to acknowledge her, and hopefully she's on the line from Tanzania, where she's traveling right now. But then in addition, there are quite a number of people in Namibia and in the U.S. who were instrumental in making this project happen. So USAID, Washington, of course, a number of people who are involved with the AIDSTAR-One project, which is a technical support and knowledge management project funded by USAID, and that's the project through which this work in Namibia happened. And also the PEPFAR technical working groups. PEPFAR funded this project, and we had great support from both the general population and youth technical working group and the most at risk populations technical working group. And then I'm hoping we have on the phone as well some folks from our wonderful collaborators in Namibia, the Namibia Society for Family Health, which was our implementing partner for this project and really conducted the entire intervention, as well as the Namibia Ministry of Health and Social Services. And we had wonderful collaboration there from Renee Adams and Verona Dupree, who really, we just wouldn't have gotten nearly as far, as fast with this project without their collaboration. So huge thanks to them. And also USAID, Namibia, Brad Corner, and CDC was also involved with this from the beginning. And also in AIDSTAR-One in DC, Heather and Helen. So that all said, as you can see, there's a cast of many people who were involved, and everyone was instrumental. I just wanted to say a few things about the project rationale before I kind of go into the details. I'm going to try to get through these slides in about 20 or 25 minutes. So at times I may have to go a little bit quickly, and I also wanted to say that there's a huge amount of data that was generated from this project, and I'm actually only going to have time to delve into parts of it. But I do encourage you to go and look at the full report. There's a lot of interesting information there that I won't have time to cover, and you may find interesting. And then I encourage you to certainly email me with any questions that you might have, and we can engage in more conversation. But I think that, we've been talking and strive for a long time, since its inception really, about the connections between alcohol consumption, and we often talk about hazardous alcohol consumption or problem drinking and HIV risk. And, the evidence just mounts month after month, year after year to really help us understand how important this connection is. But certainly a meta-analysis, for example, found that drinkers were about 1.5 times more likely to be at risk for HIV than abstainers, and problem drinkers are actually twice the risk for HIV infection. So we know a lot about sort of what at the individual level precipitates HIV risk related to alcohol use, but where we're still really struggling to make progress is understanding and intervening on the many more social and community level, environmental level dynamics that shape when and how individuals engage in risky drinking and then risky sex. So this project was really an effort to do some research and programming and try to make some inroads in that area in particular. Some of the things that we know work with individuals, for example, there are a lot of counseling approaches, and there are even counseling approaches that are being applied to integrated with HIV test counseling, seem to work over the short term. But we really don't have community level interventions at this point that have been shown to be effective. So this small pilot project was really an effort to make some progress in that area. We chose Namibia because PEPFAR was already engaged in Namibia on the alcohol topic and had already invested some funds in doing some work, again, related more to the individual level interventions. But it's a wonderful place to do this type of research. It has a generalized HIV epidemic with relatively high HIV prevalence, as is true across Southern Africa. So it's in, great need of these types of interventions. And in addition, there are really high rates of alcohol consumption, and we've known that for a long time. Namibia, the government has known that for a long time. The Ministry of Health has been concerned about this for quite a number of years, and was really interested, along with PEPFAR, in engaging in some programming around this. And I'll show you some pictures in a moment of the community where we worked, but there's just really high densities of formal and informal are basically unlicensed bars called shebeens. And this type of density is common not just in urban areas of Namibia, but across southern Africa. So you'd see similar things in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and I'm sure in many other countries that folks are on the phone from. And there has been a recent study in Namibia that found strong associations, for example, between the sheer density of drinking venues at the neighborhood level and HIV prevalence. For those of you who haven't seen where Namibia is, here it is in southwestern Africa. And we worked in Windhoek, of course. We worked in a peri-urban area just on the outskirts of Windhoek. And I just wanted to show you quickly just a global map, and I just wanted you to focus here on the Southern Africa region. This is really a map of the distribution of problem drinking globally, and this map was produced by the World Health Organization, which over the past 5 years has really become extremely involved at the global and regional level in encouraging countries to start to engage in policy work around lowering the hazards of alcohol use. But you see in southern Africa there, where we already know there's extremely high prevalence of HIV, these are also the countries that have extremely high prevalence of hazardous drinking. And the WHO really makes the point that hazardous drinking is drinking that is, it may be less frequent, but is extremely heavy. So this is the heavy episodic or binge drinking characterizes this pattern, as opposed to what's considered less hazardous drinking, which you can see in green is more common in Europe, which is regular drinking socially with meals and without heavy drinking bouts to intoxication. So you see Southern Africa is just this interesting confluence of these two public health epidemics that are really interesting at the community level, we found to work on together. So in terms of the project goal and the place where we worked, our goal was basically to develop, implement, and evaluate what we call the multi-level intervention program. And what we were really interested in doing is, at some small scale, figuring out how to initiate community and bar level changes that we thought could positively influence alcohol-related HIV risk behavior for individuals. And we did measure the outcomes at the individual level among bar patrons, or actually patrons of small, informal, unlicensed bars. And our intervention site was a 4 square kilometer neighborhood called Kabila. It was in Katutura, which is a peri-urban area. It's just on the outskirts of Windhoek, and it's just a very large area. And we chose a subsection of it, about 4 square kilometers. One of the first things we did a lot of formative research before we started designing the intervention, or certainly implementing it. We started this about 3 years ago, and one of the things we did first was just do a enumeration of all the bars in the area. And what we found were over 250 bars in this 4 square kilometer area. So once you do the math, that turns out to be about a bar every 30 meters, which sounds dense, and it is, but it's true. About every third home is selling alcohol in some form or another. And this is just a photograph of what the community looks like. It's a community that is very much made up of fairly recent migrants from the northern parts of the country. And the northern parts of the country are where most of the agricultural farmland is for the nation, and people migrate into the capital city often from there. And their first place of residence typically is a neighborhood like this, where they can easily get a little plot of land, put up a small dwelling, and then look for some ways to make money. And the most accessible livelihood in a neighborhood like this is selling alcohol. And this is alcohol that may be brewed right at home, or also, bottled, commercially available beer that can be, bought wholesale and then sold. retail from a home. These are all unlicensed bars, and so as I said, over 250 of them in this small area. I'm sure if we did another enumeration now, this neighborhood has grown certainly since we have started working there, and I'm sure there are well over 300 bars there at this point. And I just wanted to show you a photograph too of what we're talking about when we talk about a bar. You know, it's a very modest enterprise. These are just home-based establishments, and here you see one of them called Holly House. Another element of alcohol selling is, obviously this, alcohol and HIV issue goes beyond the, individual level dynamics of heavy drinking. This is, it's a complex problem that has to do with the economic situation that people find themselves as they move to cities. And as we all know, urbanization is, the trend right now in sub-Saharan Africa, and as more and more people flock to cities, the questions become, what kinds of livelihoods are available. There's very high unemployment, certainly in Namibia as a whole, and this community in particular. So you have the situation where you have this incredibly dense number of alcohol establishments, and then you also have the alcohol industry, which is pretty aggressively marketing alcohol to residents. And even if you're an unlicensed bar owner, you can easily get, these types of free advertisements that you can put up at your bar. And this is just one to show you the types of advertisements that you see when you move around the community. And I like this one in particular because it really helps to bring to light this connection that the alcohol industry, certainly in all countries, like to draw between sexuality and masculinity and heavy alcohol use, which is, I think, a really interesting social dynamic that is well worth exploring. So just to go into a little bit of detail about the intervention that we ended up designing based on a lot of formative work that we did with bar patrons, with community members, with leaders of the community where we were working who were extremely, extremely supportive of this project. It really had two components. One was community mobilization, and by this we just meant we put together what we call the Community Action Committee, which was made up of these community-level leader gatekeepers as well as just concerned citizens who wanted to participate in the project and who wanted to raise awareness among their peers and community members around the threat of alcohol use as both a general public health threat as well as its connection to HIV risk. The HIV risk was something that people recognized when we brought it up, but it's not typically something that community members tend to jump to in terms when they think about the threat of alcohol use. The types of things that community members tend to be most concerned about have to do with crime and violence, as well as things around child welfare, very concerned about the effects of heavy drinking and all of these drinking establishments on their children's safety and well-being. So we tackled all of that at once. I think we let the community, definitely wanted them to lead in terms of really charting out and talking about the ways that alcohol was negatively affecting them and their communities. And they did a lot of door-to-door work as well, these groups of community mobilizers, as well as doing some edutainment events in public places in the community. And then we also worked with a group of 24 bar owners. And we worked with them because we wanted to see whether or not it was possible to get them kind of enthusiastically involved in making their bars safer. And we did that by encouraging them to engage in a number of different activities. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the bar-based activities that we were encouraging. So one set of activities had to do with interpersonal interventions by bar staff, and this included training bar staff and owners to really start discussing the hazards of heavy drinking with their patrons, providing general information about HIV risk and HIV transmission and prevention, recommending that patrons stop drinking when they become intoxicated, or actually refusing to sell alcohol to patrons who are already intoxicated. And as well as encouraging them to eat food and drink water or some kind of non-alcoholic drinks before they continue to drink more. And then we also talked to them about changing structural aspects of the bar environment. And that included things that we thought might be a little bit difficult to get them to do. For example, we wanted them to explore whether or not keeping more regular hours and even shortening their hours. So closing earlier at night, opening later in the morning might be really helpful. And then selling other types of food, selling non-alcoholic beverages, and ensuring condoms were available. We worked very hard to make sure that all the participating bars had ready access and good availability of condoms. And then displaying posters and other types of kind of educational materials in the bar. For the evaluation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about and show you some of the data that we collected in evaluating the project. And we basically wanted to assess, first of all, its feasibility, because, we hadn't done anything like this in this community, certainly. Nothing like this had been done, per se, in Namibia. We really wanted to see whether it was possible to do. We also wanted to measure the exposure of the intervention activities. So to what extent did people really take up the intervention activities, especially for the bar owners. We were very curious about to what extent they were able to do any of the types of activities that we had suggested and worked with them to develop. We wanted to measure to the extent that we could, given the modest study design, any preliminary program effects. And then we wanted to document operational lessons that we had learned as well. So this is just a little, I wanted to just show you the types of outcome measures we were looking at in the different domains. So in alcohol use, we were using the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test, which is widely used all over the world. So we used that. In particular, we were very interested in binge drinking as a measure of hazardous alcohol use and whether or not that was binge drinking decreased at all during the course of the study, and these other types of measures around standard alcohol units consumed, intentions to drink, and whether or not people felt they had control over their drinking. And then we also looked at sexual risk intentions, which were having discussed condoms, refusing to have sex without a condom, and all the others you see here. We actually looked at sexual behaviors as well on a partner-by-partner basis. So we have a lot of data about number of sex partners, how many sex acts were protected and unprotected, and whether a condom was used the last time they had sex or whether they were drunk at last sex. HIV knowledge, and then we also asked questions about the bar environment, because of course this was meant to be an intervention that really substantially changed the environment in which people were drinking. So we were very interested in things having to do with what people observed at their bars at baseline and then at endline, including feeling safe from violence and whether or not people were just observing any more or less extreme intoxication at the bars. And then just about our methods, our data collection happened in two waves. We had a quantitative survey at baseline and endline. These were cross-sectional samples. We did not follow a cohort of bar patrons over time. We did use time-location sampling, which is a pretty common way of getting close to getting a representative sample of individuals who tend to frequent particular venues. It's very useful in bar research all over the world. We've used it a lot. I've used it a lot in my work in Zimbabwe as well. And then we collected qualitative data as well, interviews and focus groups at endline. We have a ton of qualitative data as well from our formative research, of course, before the intervention was developed. And then Society for Family Health, SFH, did a great job of also collecting a lot of monitoring data of the implementation of the interventions. We have a lot of event-level reporting. We have tons of information on how the mobilization activities took place, and as well as the Community Action Committee, how those meetings went and decisions that were taken by the community. So I just wanted to let you know a little bit about the survey respondents. At baseline, we randomly selected, so we enumerated all the bars in the community, of which there are 256, and we randomly selected 50 of those, or 43 of those bars. And we did the baseline survey with a representative sample of bar patrons from those 43 randomly selected bars. There were a total of 500 people sampled, and you can see most of them were men. A considerable number of women as well. And then at endline, our endline data collection only took place at the 24 bars that participated in the project. And of course that was because we wanted to measure the impact of the intervention itself. Because, of course, it was voluntary whether or not bar owners wanted to participate, only 3 of the bars were included in both the baseline and the end line. So there's a possible selection bias there that, it could be that the bars that ended up participating in the intervention were somehow systematically different from an average bar. They could have been less risky to begin with. But that said, I think, we were less worried about that just because this is a very tiny, small, tightly knit, small community. There's not a lot of variation among bars. Most of them are pretty much of a type. So, but we also have some ways through our data analysis of kind of examining this possible bias. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in general, bar patrons are young men and women. They are average age is 31, 32 years old. Most are unmarried, but in some type of relationship. Proportion are married. The majority have at least a primary education. So 71% have a primary education, but very few had education beyond secondary. And about 35% of men and 42% of women were formally employed with a salary. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the findings and in terms of the exposure, what we found about the exposure of individuals to the intervention activities, the pre-post trend analysis, because of course we do have a baseline and an end line. So we have a little, some data. Of course, it has to be interpreted with some caution since we don't have a control group. But then we also looked at a dose response analysis from within the bars that received the intervention to give us a little bit of a sense of how well the intervention seemed to be triggering some effects. And then a few insights from the qualitative data. The key takeaways from the exposure analysis are basically that there was actually relatively high intensity of intervention over a fairly short period. The intervention was 9 months total, but that included a good 3 months of really just getting started and getting the bar owners trained up and having the workshops and giving the Community Action Committee time to get up and running. So it was really only 9 months that the intervention was actually going. And I would say probably more like 6 or 7 months that it was at any type of intensity. So we were really pleased to see that even over that short period of time that there really was pretty good intensity of the intervention. Generally speaking, bar owners actually were able to successfully make changes to their bar environments, and these were noticed by their patrons. And they were also successful at intervening with their highest risk customers, and we thought that was really very, very encouraging to see. There were consistent responses across bars. So of the 24 bars that we worked with, 9 of them we deemed to be kind of highly adherent to the intervention, meaning that they clustered in terms of their patrons reporting that they observed changes in those bars across many of the different activities that we were measuring. So we were also very pleased about that. And the exposure of bar patrons to the community mobilization activities were also pretty high. So that was really encouraging. So I just want to show you a few of those details. And this just shows how individuals were experiencing interpersonal interventions by the bar staff. And in terms of people who directly experienced 2 or more interventions, overall there were 24% people experienced 2 or more interventions, and that was more than with men than with women. And then even larger number of bar patrons observed others experiencing the intervention. So see that a total of 38% people had observed either a bar owner intervening with a bar patron or some other type of personal intervention, such as refusing to sell alcohol to someone who was already intoxicated. Observed changes to the bar environment. There was a reported increase in alcohol and HIV materials. 15% of people said that they noticed an increase in condom availability. 33% actually said that they noted a decrease in bar hours, which was very encouraging. And some also said they saw an increase of sale or non-alcoholic beverages. And community mobilization, likewise, was pretty good. People either had participated, reported themselves having participated in home visits or having received a home visit or some kind of communication or meeting. And as you would suspect, they had heard of many others as well being exposed to that. So I want to talk just a little about the pre-post analysis key takeaways. We found some possible improvements over time. Of course, it's a little bit hard to interpret because of the lack of a control group. But we did see some decreases in level of alcohol dependency according to the audit. Frequency of binge drinking was reduced, and there's a lot of strong findings around people really perceiving that they were increasingly safe within their bars. Running a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to go on this a little bit quickly. But I just wanted you to note that the audit scores decreased from 10.8. The audit scores, a score of 8 or above signals potential for harmful drinking, and the scores already on average were quite high. But we did see a reduction from 10.8 to 9 on those scores, and binge drinking as well. A big reduction in binge drinking from 54% to 25%. We didn't see much change in sexual behavior at all, however, despite some of these, improvements in alcohol behavior. And I just wanted to note that the perceptions of bar environment were kind of striking. People really did see a lot of difference between baseline and endline in terms of their bars being, in terms of people engaging in violence, people being willing to exchange sex for alcohol, etc. Now, again, because there were only 3 bars, we participated both in the baseline and endline. We also looked at that by those three bars only, and we see the same type of changes there. So it does increase our confidence a little bit that the baseline endline, it's definitely not a perfect comparison, but I don't think it's a bad comparison either. And then just a little bit about the dose response analysis, because this was a way for us to really look at how well the intervention, or how close a connection there was between intervention activities and actual improvements that we saw. So we just looked at outcomes observed among patrons who directly experienced 2 or more of the individual level interventions. And that ended up being 24% of the endline sample were exposed by that criteria, and 76% were unexposed by that criteria. And what we see there are basically the key takeaways that bar staff did seem to be appropriately targeting the intervention to high-risk patrons. There were improved sexual risk intentions, for example, intentions to use condoms, having bought condoms, and attitudes towards condoms. I'll just show you some of those as well. I just want to say that though, there wasn't a statistically significant difference in binge drinking, except for among women. We did see some improvements among women with binge drinking from 2% to 18%. But I particularly wanted to show you sorry, I'm having to skip ahead because I want to make sure that we see this slide. So sexual risk by individual level exposure. These are the different types of sexual risk that we looked at. And you can see the first 4 of them are statistically significant. So by exposure, people who were exposed to the intervention did discuss condoms more with their partners, obtained condoms for sale or for free, had obtained condoms at the bar, and refused to have sex without a condom. So in all of those cases, the exposure seems to be linked with those outcomes. We didn't see that significance on the other 3 measures you see there, which is always intends to use a condom, feeling in control of using a condom, and very likely to use a condom with a casual partner after drinking. Those cases, the exposure seemed to not be as related. I'm going to skip to the qualitative insights because I wanted to get a few of these in before we run out of time, and then we can talk some more. But, we talked a lot to the bar owners, obviously. We had a lot of interaction with them, as well as with the Community Action Committee, and we talked to them a lot about how kind of they felt that the intervention had played out for them. And, what we were worried about at the beginning was that bar owners would be so reluctant to engage in any of these activities because they just wanted to protect their livelihoods. But what we found was that bar owners were pretty interested in their identity as small business owners and really were quite interested and eager to participate in a program that allowed them to find out about ways to both conduct a business more professionally and at the same time engage with their community around a topic that they, like their fellow community members, felt was really important, and misuse of alcohol. was one of those. So this is just one bar owner who, said that I feel good because the training brought even a change to me. He says he used to drink quite a bit more, but has moderated his alcohol use and has able to advise his customers and the information, access to information he found very empowering. And so this is a refrain that we heard a lot from bar owners, and I suppose is one of the encouraging findings of this project was really about how, to what extent can you work with unlicensed informal bar owners who are, they're just there in so many numbers, and the question becomes, how do you deal with the informal alcohol industry? And I think that this was our attempt to try to figure out one strategy that could work. And for the community mobilization component as well, we really were encouraged by the response of the community. People talked about, just the empowerment that came from exchanging ideas, and the community members who really became most invested in their work with the advisory committee, the action committee, really had some nice stories to tell about how their involvement had really allowed them to formulate their ideas a lot more concretely around what kinds of actions they could take around reducing the density of alcohol establishments and helping the community kind of create action plans to do that. Obviously, there's a lot of limitations to the study, and I would be the first to note that these are not definitive findings in any way. I think that this was an attempt to do a demonstration. Our lack of control group certainly gives a limitation to our power of attribution. There could have been some selection bias. We had a very short time frame to observe results. And as with all self-reported, HIV risk behavior surveys, there's always the threat of social desirability bias, and this study is no exception to that rule. But I think that said, some interesting, lessons that we learned and help us think through what the next steps might be, both in terms of intervention and research around the efficacy of those interventions. Feasibility is definitely there. We found bar owners to be willing partners. We definitely would recommend a lot of formative research. I think the formative research that we conducted really helped. The intervention itself would not have been possible without the rapport that we built with community leading up to that through the formative research and involving community members in the analysis of those data. And we had some workshops that we conducted after the formative research where we fed back the research data, and we went through a process of community members kind of helping to say what it meant to them and what they would like to see in terms of an intervention approach. Some methodological challenges for the researchers and the audience that pop up that I think we need to think through carefully is, how do you conduct research like this in the communities where the population is just by nature very transient? A lot of the community members are migrant, and they come and they go. Bars open, they close very frequently. As well as attrition bias in an intervention like this. If the program is extremely successful, that bar owners may voluntarily remove themselves from the sample because they decide to close their bar and start other types of businesses, and that does happen. And we saw stories of that, not within the 24 bars that we worked with, but there are lots of stories in the community of people closing their bars and starting other types of businesses. And then the other thing that, I think comes out from this project is that we really measured our intervention in terms of its effect on bar patrons per se. And in one way, we do that because that's the easiest thing to do. But I think we need much better approaches for really measuring the impact of an intervention like this or on some population level measures that would allow us to really get a sense of the community level impact, which is what we're trying to achieve in any case. So I think that, with more, a larger budget and more time, I think that it would be very interesting to do more of a population-based survey where we could really measure baseline and end line around some of these other measures, and especially around some of the measures that were most salient for the community. And those include violence, for example, crime, and child welfare. So those were some things that I took away. Going on to a new project, I think that would be really interesting to look at. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of ask you all, where do you think we go from here? I think that this is just a newspaper headline that came out around the time that we released our formative research findings. And this is obviously a topic of great interest for Namibians and the Namibian government, certainly, for the Ministry of Health, and for law enforcement. And, how do we make sure that the work that we're doing is relevant to those policy debates? How can we make sure that the findings that we have are useful to the larger community as decisions get made around how to intervene on hazardous alcohol use? So I'd be really interested in hearing more. I'm happy to answer questions or provide more clarifications. I'm sorry I had to go through some of the data rather quickly, but I do encourage you to look at the report and write to me, and we can talk further. But I know some of you are on the line from countries and USAID missions that may have participated in these conversations over time around alcohol and HIV, and I'd just be really interested in hearing from you all as well about what's been going on in your countries.
Anna had a couple of questions. She wanted to know, when you say the community was very supportive of the study, was there any discernible difference in the level of support among women versus men? And is the rate of hazardous drinking different among women and men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was actually. Most of the members of our Community Action Committee were women. We had a few men, and the men, among the men who participated, some of them were bar owners themselves, and of course we encouraged that because we wanted bar owners to be part of that community process. But there definitely is a sense, yes, in which women are more aware and mobilized, I think, to try to do something about this at the community level. The woman who was the chairperson of our Community Action Forum, she actually used to be a bar owner, and she gave it up a number of years ago because she said that she just didn't feel good about it anymore. She saw the harm that was coming to the community from alcohol use. And she started a new business, which was a creche, basically a nursery school, for especially for at-risk children and children who have been orphaned by HIV. And that was her new business, and she was doing both a community service and was, earning a livelihood through that. So I think she was a really good example of what I sensed, at least from women in the community, which was that they were really both concerned and fed up with this, with the harms that they saw.
And about the rates of hazardous drinking between men and women, do you have a?
We do the rate. Well, we only have data about bar patrons, which is of course different from community members as at large. And among bar patrons, there's not a huge difference. I think the women who do go to bars tend to be heavy drinkers.
Right.
So I would say at a population level, yes, to the extent that we have data at the population level, which isn't great. We have a few surveys that have been done in this general area with this general population. Yes, heavy drinking is more common among men.
Can we go on to another one, Katherine? We have a question from Doug Endel from Furut in Norway, who says thanks for the presentation, and could you elaborate a little on the communication methods and messages used in the home visits and community meetings?
Well, those were we didn't prescribe messages for those interactions. I think that the community action group really they were they developed their own ways of talking about this with community members, and I think it was less less message oriented than it was. Let's have a conversation. Let's get a conversation started about this. What do you see in the community? What kinds of harms do you think are associated? What do you think we can do about it? Are there any hopeful signs? And really talking through with people. Doing problem solving basically with people as opposed to going out with specific messages.
Right. We have a question from Barbara Desalduondo, who I'm probably mispronouncing, sorry, who would like to know why you didn't want to or need to sample non-intervention bars at the end line to improve the attribution aspect.
Yeah, hi Brazy. It's nice to see you. I think thanks for asking this question. The study design, was as good as we could do on, the amount of time that we had and the budget that we had. But basically what would have been ideal would have been our baseline data collection was also really part of our formative research because we were just trying to get an understanding of what the prevalence was of problem drinking, for example, and HIV risk behavior in a representative sample of that community. I think what would have been ideal would have been then to go on, recruit the bars to participate in the program, and then do another baseline just with those bars, and then do the end line again with those bars. So we would have been able to compare baseline and end line better. But I think that would have required, another 6 to 8 months of work, and as well as, additional funding to do another baseline. I think that in studies like this, when I've done this before, it's really nice to do that pre-baseline and then move on to do a baseline and then the end line, because then obviously then you have more, your data is, your powers of inference are much, much better.
We have a question now from Helvi Shilongo. I don't know if you've unmuted yourself and can ask your question on the phone. Hello? Okay, so that's, you press *7 if you'd like to unmute yourself. Okay, meanwhile, let's have another question from Lisa Sanudi, who wants to know if bar owners earn their living through the sale of alcohol, what incentives were there to convince themselves to advise customers to limit consumption? Was that not shooting themselves in the foot? And also an interest in knowing what the reception was from sex workers to the intervention, if you had any way of knowing that.
Right. Yeah, on the first point, I think that, yes, and that's what we were concerned about as well, was would bar owners, and the formative data we collected also would indicate that bar owners would be reluctant because they didn't want to reduce their sales. It's the same issue with shortening their hours. But what we found in the end was that bar owners were equally interested, not just in the sheer volume of sales they were doing, but also issues around crime and safety and reducing the chaos around their bars. And that was also a very strong incentive, I think, for bar owners to, they want people to drink, but they want people to drink in a controlled environment that's not characterized by a lot of fighting. And for them, I think that controlling people's binge drinking and levels of heavy intoxication were a way of bringing that sense of control to their business that they really did value.
Right.
Oh, and then sex workers. We did not specifically try to identify or target sex workers. The bars themselves, it's variable in terms of what extent they're used as venues for sex workers to recruit clients. Most of these smallish bars, the sex work that's there is just very, very informal. So it would have been difficult in any case to get people to self-identify as engaging in transactional sex. So we don't really know. I think we'd have to concentrate on that in a different way in future work to really understand a bit better how women who were engaged in transactional sex were kind of viewing the intervention activities, and in what ways a future project could be much more tailored to those needs. My sense is that the more formal transactional sex that takes place tends to happen at larger larger bars in other parts of the community where there's more volume of customers, and it's more of a business model in terms of connecting the sex work to the bar environment. I think these very small scale home-based bars they're not that type of environment exactly.
Right. We're still hoping to get a question from Helvi Shilongo. Have you managed to unmute yourself? Hello? Helvi?
Hello.
No? Oh, you're there. Good. Go ahead.
Yes. It's Helvi speaking from the Society for Female Health here in Namibia. And we were working in collaboration with the ICRW to implement a pilot project. So I just would like to add to what Katherine said about, regarding the question on what messages did we give the community mobilizers. Actually, we did not give them specific written messages, but we had a training for them, a preparatory training for them to go into the community. And we trained them on the basic HIV concept, what the RICA Act of Namibia is saying, and on some basic presentation skills and assertiveness, so that they develop their confidence to go in the community and be able to answer different questions and mobilize their community.
Thank you, Helvi. Thank you, Helvi. And Helvi was the coordinator for all of these intervention activities and is a master community mobilizer. All credit to Helvi and Johannes Haufiku as well for really making all this happen on the ground. It was really brilliant.
That's great. Thanks so much. We have a comment from Ed Skoll, who would like to point out that he thinks alcohol interventions are a great opportunity for integrated programming between those working in HIV and those working in other health areas, especially in light of the global burden of diseases findings that alcohol is the third leading risk factor for death and disability worldwide. So I think that's a very useful statistic to give us some context on this kind of work. And then there's a follow-up question from Noreen Gumbo, who would like to know if you have any references or experiences of similar studies in other rural communities. This is obviously urban. Do you have any experiences of work done in rural communities like this?
I don't personally, but I would love to hear from anyone on the phone who does. I suspect that a similar type of intervention could be done, in a rural setting, but my work has all been in urban settings. And just to follow up on Ed's comment as well, thanks for bringing up the World Health Organization's burden of disease report, because it's quite amazing. The leading cause of illness and disability worldwide is childhood malnutrition, followed by unsafe sex, and the third is alcohol. And the World Health Organization has been doing great work over the past, 5-10 years, and really trying to mobilize folks to recognize that, and and for countries to really start, getting motivated to create some helpful policies.